What is going on, gunfighters? I thought you would enjoy this episode on Memorial Day about the Ar-15. I put out 2 episodes today, one on lessons learned in the Marine Corps on Alpha Male, if you want to check that out, and this one on the Ar-15. I thought both would be fitting for Memorial Day. I hope you have a blessed one. Welcome back to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting the right way from a Judeo-Christian worldview and from real-world first-hand experience. As always, I am your host, Michael Milito. First and foremost, I am a Christian. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Psalm 144. And the Lord is a man of war. Exodus 15. I make no apologies for that. You certainly don't have to be a Christian to listen to this podcast, but just know that I come at everything from that perspective. Today's episode is going to be entitled something like America's Rifle, the Ar-15. Now we, and when I say we, I mean this community, Gunfighter Life, we've talked about the Ar-15 versus the AK-47 before, and rifles for survival and battle rifles, so you can go back and check out those older episodes. But this episode is specifically on the AR. Before we get into the bio, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment on the podcast. If you're listening to this on iTunes or similar platform, you can usually scroll down and see the little stars and give a good review. If this is the first time listening, feel free to wait till the end. I like to earn the review. If you've already listened to 1 or 2 episodes, if you want to give it a star rating, or if you would actually like to write a review. If you want to support, you can go to Patreon. I'll put a link in the show notes. With that, we'll roll into the bio. If you want to skip it, you can generally skip to about 3.5-4 minutes in. First and foremost, I am a Christian. I make no apologies for that. It is first and foremost in my life, the greatest of all the commandments. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. I don't apologize for that. I am an alpha male, and as such I follow the ultimate male, the ultimate alpha male, the greatest man that ever lived, Jesus Christ. A little bit about my background. In addition to that, I am a veteran. I've been to war. I served in both the United States Marine Corps in the infantry and the United States Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. Joined at 17, went to war more than once. I also served in law enforcement. I worked as a police officer in LAPD doing patrol assignments and more specialized assignments, tracking down fugitives and those kind of jobs. So by God's grace, I've made it through some nasty places and times overseas and some dangerous streets in the States. Not because I'm better than any of the men that didn't, but because God chose to have mercy and grace on me. To God be the glory. Also served as a private contractor for the U.S. government. For an agency I won't specify. By God's grace, He got me through all that. In addition to that, I started competition shooting even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I've been blessed to win more shooting competitions than I can remember, both rifle and pistol. Mostly pistol are most of my competition and championship wins. But I have also competed in, muzzle loader, archery, shotgun, knife throwing, hatchet throwing. I've been very blessed with those talents, and I try and use them and multiply them. I've done quite a bit of hunting and outdoor, I guess we'd say, survival-type activities, hunting and fishing all over this beautiful country. I have been a professional hunter and guide. Not many people today can see they've been a professional, exotic, and big game hunter of things like bison and exotic animals, but I have been one, and I'm very blessed for that. I've also gone out into the wilderness, by God's grace, with a Bible and a shotgun, and not just survived, but thrived. Also a professional firearms instructor. For the United States Marine Corps, I was an urban warfare and desert warfare instructor under a Mojave Viper. I'm also a FBI certified firearms instructor and have been for a lot of years. I'm certified by some other 3-letter government agency. NRA certified instructor. And I have taught at one of the big-name firearms shooting academies in the country. So I've been very blessed to win many competitions and be a shooting instructor for military, law enforcement, and civilians. I have served as a commander of a tactical team. My current full-time job is as a leader of a tactical team. Primary mission is to stop active shooters in a fairly large metropolitan area. Alright guys, with that, we'll get into the topic, the Ar-15, America's Rifle. And I was thinking about that title, and at first I was kind of disagreeing with it in my head, because when I think of like a classic American rifle, I kind of think of the Winchester Model 70 Pre-64. But when I thought about it, that's based on a Mauser Action, which is German. The AR-15 is a very American design, and it is the most popular rifle in America. And we think of it as this new space-age thing, especially like this new dangerous assault weapon you see it portrayed as in the media. But it was designed in the 1950s, guys. It was designed at the same time those old 50 Chevys were designed. Its basic design hasn't changed much since the 50s, and it was adopted in the 60s. It's, 70 to 60 years old, depending on how you want to slice that apple. It's not new. It's a classic. So I guess we can call it America's rifle. Is it the only rifle? No. Is it the best for everything? No, but it's a great rifle. And before we get into the topic, we'll talk about what you're going to use the AR for. And unless I specify specific things, when I talk about the AR, I'm talking about the most common, M4 clones. Your 16-inch carbine, fighting carbine is what we're talking about. General purpose fighting carbine, unless we denote some other specific purpose for this discussion. And we'll talk about some other stuff in the end, but what I'd like to do is kind of go from the front to the back, talk about things you should look for and things maybe you don't need to look for or aren't that important that everybody seems to make important on the rifle if you're choosing an AR or choosing your next AR, and accessories, what's really important, what's not really important. So with that, we'll talk about the muzzle device, which I would suggest for most of us, for most applications, for the general purpose 16-inch carbine or most other iterations, that standard birdcage A2 flash hider is a great design, in my opinion. It's a good balance of hiding flash, a good balance of helping with muzzle rise, is a good balance of not kicking up a lot of dust and dirt and debris and not being super loud. And there are certainly more specialized devices that can reduce recoil more or reduce noise more or things like that, but you kind of start getting away from the general purpose A2 flash hider. I think that really is a good balance. And if you don't know a specific reason for something better, the A2 is a good place to start. The military doesn't get everything right, I'll be the first to admit that, but I think they really did a good job on that A2 flash hider. I'm not going to tell you that muzzle brakes don't belong on fighting rifles. I think the majority of my fighting rifles have muzzle brakes instead of the A2. Still use an A2 sometimes for a go-to fighting rifle. It just really depends on knowing what you want. Unless you want something more specialized and you know what that is, I'd say the A2 is a great place to start. Next, let's get into the barrel. Obviously, the barrel is very, very important. A couple of important things on the barrel. I would say certainly worth the extra money is getting a chrome-lined or a nitride barrel. Kind of the standard since World War II for good fighting rifles is a cold hammer forged chrome-lined barrel. That is a great thing. Those are great barrels. A lot of people think that nitriding is subpar to that. I would just say that it's newer. I say nitriding, if done properly, can be every bit as good. Has some advantages over cold hammer forged chrome-lined barrels. Don't shy away from nitriding, but I will tell you that either one of those is far better than a rifle that doesn't have that. That will greatly generally extend the life of your barrel, and it will also do something else very important for a fighting rifle. Generally, if the bore is chrome-lined, then the chamber is also chrome-lined, which really helps with extracting of cases and can really reduce the number of malfunctions. And in a fighting rifle, I'd say that's a good thing. So if you get a chance, spend the extra money on a chrome-lined or a nitrided barrel. The other thing, and I think this is overemphasized, is rifle twist rate. Rifle twist rate is important. I'm not going to say that it's not. Most rifles nowadays are coming with a 1 in 7, 1 in 8, but don't shy away from the 1 in 9. For most people, if you're running the 55 to 62, 64 grain ammunition, which was what the vast majority of most people are going to shoot, the 1 in 9 does fine. The military switched to 1 in 7, I believe, for tracer rounds, and the 60-something grain range, which are much longer than regular rounds, to stabilize those. But if you're talking about a fighting rifle and you're going to be shooting the 55 grain to the 62 grain, in that ballpark, then a 1 in 9 will do fine. A 1 in 7 is great. A 1 in 8 is great. A 1 in 9 will do fine. Don't think that you're under advantage with a 1 in 9 over a 1 in 7. The 77 grain bullets, they're great. They're great rounds, I'm sure. But are you going to really be doing most of your practicing with 77 grain bullets? They're quite expensive. So whatever you practice with, I am a big advocate of getting a round that shoots the same point of aim, point of impact as your carry rounds. You plan on re-zeroing your rifle every time you shoot it. And for most people, the most affordable things are the 55 grain to the 62, 64 grain. And for that, it doesn't really matter. Looking at a more specialized hunting rifle, you're looking at shooting something like prairie dogs at long range. You're going to be shooting lighter bullets. Even the 1 in 12s or the 1 in 14 twist sometimes have advantages. But don't turn your nose up at an older 1 in 9 twist gun or a 1 in 9 twist barrel thinking that somehow you have to have a 1 in 7. Next, we'll touch briefly on contour. A lot of guns come with a government contour barrel. From what I understand, the only reason for that is if you're going to mount an M203 grenade launcher on it, which let's face it, most of us are not. So if you're not going to mount an M203 grenade launcher on it, the government profile barrel, which is very common, really has no advantage. It has a couple of disadvantages in weight and contour. So unless you're going to mount a grenade launcher or you just want something that looks exactly like a military version, Colt 6920 or something historically accurate, I would say there's no advantage to getting a government contour barrel. If you get a rifle that comes with that and everything else is good, don't turn your nose up at it, but the government contour barrel, I would get just a medium contour or even a pencil contour barrel if I could get it. You start getting anything heavier than that, like a H-bar barrel or a bull barrel or a fluted barrel, a heavy fluted barrel, you got to kind of weigh your options. You're giving up mobility for sustained rate of fire at that point. For most people, like I said, for a general fighting carbine, the lighter weight is going to be of more advantage, in my opinion. For all those heavier contour barrels, they have purposes, just not general purpose. With the barrel, we'll talk about what covers a big portion of the barrel where you grab it, which is the handguards. Handguards obviously are a big accessory in the AR market. Free float handguards have some real advantages. They have real accuracy advantages in not shifting point of aim, point of impact when you apply pressure to the barrel. So I'd say if you're going to run a hasty sling, not just a sling, I'm talking about a hasty sling where you actually put tension on that front sling stud, sling swivel, or you're actually going to press it down hard on a barricade, then yes, you want a free floated handguard. If not, if it's just a general purpose, home defense carbine, going out to the range carbine, a free float handguard certainly isn't going to hurt anything, but probably not super necessary. If you're not talking about free floated handguards, I really like the Magpul handguards that have been around for a long time. Just their standard, you pull the old ones off, you slap the new ones on. They've got a better contour in my opinion. They do give you the ability to mount accessories, and they're not super expensive. So I don't often give up brand recommendations, but those are really great. They've been a standard for a long time. I'm sure there are others that are just as good, but I've used those multiple times. I have one on a fighting rifle. Those handguards, they're hard to beat for that price range. And there's certainly a bunch of free float handguards out there that are great. But I would say get a handguard that lets you mount accessories on it over like this just standard M4 handguards or the A2 handguards. Because I think you really should have a white light mounted on any kind of fighting rifle. I think that is one of the essential accessories. Next, let's talk upper and lower receivers. Upper and lower receivers, the vast majority are going to be standard kind of mil-spec upper receiver. Now, I'm not real happy about the forward assist, if you know what that is. I don't think it's really useful for anything, and I don't know any school, any real tactical school that's taught using that for any kind of malfunction or anything. So I don't really see a use of it. Rather it not be there. If I had a choice, it was the same price, same option, and one rifle came with it, everything else was the same, and one came without it, I would take the one without the forward assist. That being said, I think all my ARs have forward assists. So obviously not a deal breaker. I just don't think they do anything, and if I could get rid of the weight and the extra complexity of not having one, I would get rid of it. Also, if I get a rifle that shoots really well, I don't really want to go messing with it and messing with the interface of the upper receiver and the barrel. So if I get a rifle that shoots really good, I don't mess with it. But other than that, your upper receivers, just make sure it's a good quality brand, good quality, reputable manufacturer, and you're good to go on that. The lower receiver, again, you don't have to go super expensive, but get a good quality brand. Don't try and go dirt cheap on your lower receiver. 80% lowers are fine. If you know what you're doing, you're like a machinist. But if it's for a go-to fighting rifle, I'd say get a good manufacturer, American-made, good manufacturer, low receiver, all to spec. There's tons of manufacturers that make good ones. If you've heard of it and it sounds like a good brand, it probably is a good lower receiver. The 80% lowers are fine. If you want to get one and put it away for a rainy day in case something crazy happens as far as regulations, that's fine. But if you get a choice of a good, professionally made and milled out or forged, lower receiver by a professional, I'd say go with that. Dropping down in that lower receiver, let's talk about triggers. Like we said, the military doesn't do everything right, and I think they really did a crap job on the AR trigger, like the mil-spec trigger. Certainly run them. I've certainly run them quite a bit. As a Marine, I was an expert rifleman. I qualified out to 500 yards with that horrible trigger and just regular iron sights. Certainly marksmanship is more important than the trigger, but that's a really bad trigger. If you can upgrade the trigger, that would be one of the first upgrades that I did. I don't think you need a super light trigger. I just think you should have a good quality trigger with a good clean take-up and a good clean break. Run both single-stage and two-stage triggers. I prefer a single-stage trigger. A lot of people in a lot of schools like you to run a two-stage trigger. Two-stage triggers are very common. So I do run those and I do have those. I prefer a single-stage trigger. I don't know what that is. Really look it up on a visual aid. It'll really help you. But it has like a take-up stage and a wall, they call it, and then a break. Or a single-stage trigger, you just pull the trigger and it goes off. But I would say you don't need a super light trigger on a fighting rifle if you want it for precision, if you want it for, prairie dog hunting, if you want it for, tight group shooting on a bench, that's great. But I would say, some trigger in the 3.5 to 5 pound range is good for a fighting rifle. You don't need anything super light. Dropping down from the trigger, let's talk about the grip. If you like the standard grip that comes on it, nothing wrong with that. If you want to run that for a while until you find a grip that you really like, that's fine. I don't really have a preference on individual grips, but I really don't like that finger extension. It divides, like it's supposed to divide like your first finger and your other fingers. That never really lines up for me, especially if I'm doing any kind of dynamic movement or something. I don't like that. I don't like that finger protrusion in there, so I pretty much get rid of that. But I don't really care what you get, whatever brand. If you want something with a nice squishy, cushiony grip or a rubber grip or better grip, that's great. I have those. They work great. The only thing that's really a deal breaker for me is I like to get rid of, like I said, that finger protrusion on the grip. Alright, next let's move back up to the top of the receiver and the front, talking about your sighting systems, your optics, or lack thereof. I'm a big proponent of learning how to shoot with iron sights. I was really kind of upset when I heard that not upset, but I was disappointed when I heard that the Marine Corps and the Army doesn't require you to qualify with iron sights anymore. Definitely know there are advantages to optical sights. I run them on my fighting rifles. I think every good rifleman ought to cut his teeth and know how to shoot iron sights well. A little story to talk about irons versus optics. So I was there for the initial invasion of Iraq. I joined pre 9/11. I was there waiting for the war to kick off. So when the war kicked off, I had an old beat up M16 A2, who knows how many rounds it had through it, with just plain iron sights and just a plain green web sling. I may have bought or made some other kind of fancier sling for it later. Anyway, my second deployment, I was issued a brand new M16 A4, not an M4. The Marines use an M16 A4, which is a much heavier rifle, big thick barrel, big thick handguards, with a brand new ACOG. And I don't know, it was issued to me, so maybe it wasn't brand new, but it sure looked brand new to me. Very, very good condition, with a very nice optic. The ACOG, 6 power optic. It was a good optic, very rugged. And that for my second tour in Iraq. The first rifle I had was crap, and I say that because it literally had a catastrophic failure on me during the war, meaning that it had a malfunction that could not be fixed by the user. It had to go to an armorer to be fixed in the middle of a war zone, in the middle of the invasion of Iraq. So that rifle kind of sucked. It was very old. Left my bad taste in my mouth for a long time for the AR. But the second one I was issued worked fine. But anyway, getting back to the optics on those rifles, I never felt like I had a big advantage with the optic. Iraq over the iron sights, that fixed power optic works fine. But if I'm doing up close and personal stuff, let's say work, urban environment, those iron sights I think are really great. They can be acquired quickly, And like I said, I qualified out to 500 yards expert with just iron sights and that less than ideal military trigger. And they're fast up close. So I would say I would really encourage you to cut your teeth on iron sights and get to shoot iron sights. That being said, optics do have an advantage. If you're talking about your go-to general purpose, like we talked about, 16-inch carbine, I think a red dot is hard to beat. They've come a long way in technology. I would say, I would always encourage you to buy American when you can. You can't always if you're looking for certain features. There's a lot of good companies that make a lot of good red dot sights. Red dot sights in general don't have a very, very generous eye box, meaning you don't have to be in a perfect position like you do with a small peep iron sight. It can let you get hits faster in awkward positions, which in a gunfight is a great thing. Getting a quick first or second or third round hit on target quickly is a big advantage, and red dots are fast. And if you're not going to be shooting past 200-300 yards, red dot's probably what I would recommend. With that being said, I've been running low power variable optics for a long time, long before I ever remember seeing it being the cool hot thing, back when people kind of looked at you funny if you ran a low power variable optic. As I alluded to, I ran some more specialized assignments in law enforcement, and I switched to a low power variable optic long before they were the thing. They have a great advantage. I don't think they're needed. You can hit a man-sized target out to 500 yards with a full-length rifle out to 300 yards consistently with a carbine. But that optic does help you identify your target better, which if you're trying to find somebody that's trying to hide from you at a distance in a natural environment, can be a real advantage. You're taking a precise shot even at 75 yards, trying to get around in between, the eyes and the nose, and in that very fatal area. If you're trying to get a shot in that zone at distance, it lets you identify that zone and see that zone better. Low power variable optics are a great choice. Get a rugged one, get a good one. I don't often recommend brands, but Leopold, I've run a bunch of other brands. I do run a Trigicon on my Scar. It is great on the Trigicon AccuPoint, but it is quite expensive. If you're looking for, a good durable optic, low power variable optic, there are other brands out there. There are other good brands out there. But Leopold, American made, great brand. They make very, very expensive and very, very, I would say, reasonably priced optics, and their reasonably priced optics, in my opinion, are still very rugged and very good. So you may want to look at those. Now, obviously, there are other different kind of optics you can put on there, but that's a more specialized role. If you want to, like I said, hunt coyotes, hunt prairie dogs at long range with a bull barrel, you probably want a more traditional hunting scope on there. That's fine. And as important as your optic is a mount. You need a good rock solid mount. Don't get a good rock solid rifle and a good optic and try and go for the bargain basement mounts. Get really good mounts. For years and years I ran the Warns. I really like the Warns. They are rock solid. The Warn mounts, look those up. They are great mounts. I recently switched to the DNZ mounts, and they are also rock solid, and they are simpler. They have less moving parts. And in my opinion, on a rifle, on a fighting instrument, less and simpler, if it can accomplish the same task, is generally better. The DNZ mounts really have a good endorsement for me as well. We're talking about a go-to fighting rifle, though. Make sure you get an optic that you can run both eyes open. I don't often say people are wrong unless you have some kind of physical ailment or something. Techniques vary from person to person. I'm not saying that everybody should shoot like me, but I'm saying you're wrong if you're running a fighting stance and closing an eye. So get an optic you can run with both eyes open, whether that's iron sights, whether that's a red dot, whether that's a low power variable optic. Get an optic you can run with both eyes open. Talking about fighting and gunfighting, why would you get rid of half of your peripheral vision, and why would you get rid of your depth perception? Anyway, where were we on moving back and forth on the rifle? I've guess we covered the middle fairly well. Let's talk about the bolt on the inside. The standard, mil-spec bolt works great. Full auto, not full auto, doesn't really matter because most of us aren't going to run full auto. Good, solid bolt, just like we talked about. Coatings are important on the barrel. Most of your mil-spec stuff is going to come phosphated or some version thereof, and that's fine. If you can get a chrome-lined bolt or, a nitrided bolt, even better. I run both piston and DI guns. If you're going to run a DI gun, the bolt can get really dirty, so I would suggest getting a nitrided or some other kind of slick-coated if you are going to run it hard and put it away wet, as they say. That doesn't need to be the first thing you spend money on, but if you're looking at upgrades after you get good, after you've done a couple classes, you may want to look at running a slick coated bolt of some kind. Going back to the back of the receiver, talking about buffers and buffer tubes, just your standard buffer weight buffer tube, if it comes with the rifle, is fine. If you are building your rifle, look up charts for that. There's charts on, what contour barrel you're using, what length your buffer tube is and all that stuff. If you want to run like a captured spring or some other kind of system, that's fine. I'd say generally the standard one that comes with it, if your rifle runs well and doesn't malfunction and cycles properly and locks back properly, don't worry too much about messing with it. Talking about stocks, obviously they make fancy target stocks that are great. Standard M4 stock that comes with it, there's nothing wrong with it. Run it, see if you like it. I'd say run it for a while and see what you don't like about it, and then find a stock that provides the things that are lacking in that M4 style collapsible stock. I really do like the old school fixed, M16, A1, A2 style stocks. Those are great. Very accurate. They don't move. You can beat stuff with them. You can pound on stuff with them. I like that. You're talking about more modern collapsible stocks. Again, I don't generally throw out brands, but the Magpul stuff's hard to beat. It's good. It's affordable. It's made in America. Just their basic models of collapsible stocks. So I think we've covered, the rifle from front to back. Now let's talk about things I think should have on your go-to fighting rifle or on an AR. A sling, a way to carry it, a way to hold it when you're doing something else, as in fighting, hand-to-hand stuff, arresting somebody. It doesn't apply to you just walking around going through the woods. Aiding you in shooting better. If you don't know how to shoot with a hasty sling, just like we talked about learning how to shoot with iron sights, I think learning how to shoot with a hasty sling, with a tight sling, something like that, can be a useful skill. I think a sling is important. I like a more traditional 2-point sling that I can run muzzle down. But if you want a 1-point sling, that's fine. Nothing wrong with those. I run some of those as well. Just a good adjustable length 2-point sling. You don't have to spend a lot of money on them. Paracord slings are pretty cool because they have multiple uses for survival and things like that. I don't generally throw out endorsements, but I will throw out one for, let me look him up on Instagram. I bought he custom made a sling for me and it's great. An American made. His tagline is, it's paralyzed paracord. Paralyzed guy. His tagline something like a paralyzed guy making cool paracord stuff. It custom made me a sling. It came out very nice on one of my hunting rifles. I had slings for my fighting rifles. I haven't gotten one, but if I was looking at getting a new sling, I might look for him. His thing on Instagram is paralyzed paracord. So check that out if you want. Other accessories we talked about, I think a white light, if it's a fighting rifle, it's on a rifle you may ever use for defense. Obviously, you might want to identify your target. You might have a situation where you have to shoot at night. A white light is fantastic. Get a white light, a good brand that you can knock around a little bit. Don't have to spend a ton of money. The technology on lights has come a long way in a short amount of time, but just get a good one that mounts on there some kind of way that you can access it with your normal shooting stance. And I'm not the lumen Nazi. I don't think you have to have X amount of lumens. If you're talking about lighting up a target in your house or at defensive ranges, you probably don't need a ton of lumens. Probably don't need a ton of features. You need a rugged white light that will turn on and off that you can manipulate while you're holding the gun in the shooting stance. I think a white light is very important. We talked about optics. I don't think they're necessary. Obviously, I think you should have iron sights if it's a fighting rifle. I don't think that you absolutely have to have backup iron sights, but I think that they're so easy and inexpensive and easy to install. Why would you not have backup iron sights? Even if you have a good solid optic. If it's a fighting rifle, I would recommend iron sights. But if it's a fighting rifle and you want an optic, I would say if it's general purpose under 200 yards, you leave east of the Mississippi, you're probably not going to shoot beyond that. I would say stick with a red dot until you find a reason why you want to run an LPVO, low power variable optic. If you're new to shooting especially. If you want to run an LPVO, that's great, but just know they're a little less forgiving. They can also be a little bit more precise. Obviously, as important as the rifle is the ammunition. Lots of people have lots of opinion on ammunition. I'm kind of an ammunition nerd. I'm kind of a gun nerd. Obviously, I do this podcast. I'm not going to get too deep in the weeds. I am going to say what I am going to recommend you do is, like we talked about earlier, if it's a defensive gun, you're going to use it for defensive use, train with the ammo that you're going to fight with. or train with an ammo that has the same point of aim, point of impact. You have to confirm that with you, with your rifle. Just because it's the same for somebody else doesn't mean it's going to be the same for you. If you're going to use a rifle for defensive use, you should take that responsibility and test out the things you're going to use. Don't trust your life to something unless you've tested it, unless you actually trust it with real world data. So like this is for instance for me, I'm not saying this is going to work for you, but maybe if you're running, 55 grain federal ammunition for practice, run 55 grain federal. What I run is the true tactical rifle urban, or what I have run for a long time is that round that shoots the same point of aim, point of impact. Or another option is I will run the Hornady 55 grain, I think it's Frontier hollow point, and it's cheap enough and does well enough ballistically. I've shot living things with it. It does well, and it's cheap enough and affordable enough that I can run it for both training and practice. And that's just me. There's a ton of good ammunition out there. But what I'm saying is probably not a good idea to run the cheapest 55 grain, white box ammo you can find from Walmart. Nothing wrong with that ammo. If you're going to run that, though, and then you're going to run a 55 grain X brand and then run a 62 grain steel penetrator round 62 grain brand Y and expect that to hit where you're aiming. That's not how that works. So that's all I'll say about ammunition. Get a good defensive ammunition, good ammunition that's tailor-made for the purpose. The military uses their ammunition for a very specific reason. The military uses their ammunition for very specific reasons and because of restrictions placed on them. You may want to look for ammunition that has better ballistic performance than that if you can get it. With that being said, and this really doesn't even need to be said much anymore because most rifles that come out are chambered in 5.56, but you can shoot 2.23 or 5.56 in a 5.56, and you cannot shoot a 5.56, or you should not shoot a 5.56 in a 2.23 chamber. But most rifles, that's not even an issue anymore. That's gone away about a decade ago. That was really a concern, but check your chambering and shoot the ammunition made for your gun. Talking about the Zero, if you're using military iron sights and you're using, a military configured rifle, then you should probably go with a round that shoots the same point of aim, point of impact as that, and zero whatever distance that is for that weapon. You can look that up, whether that's 36 yards, whether that's 25 yards. You probably want to use that because all that math is already done for you. So do the BZO at that distance and confirm at your 300 yard mark or whatever it is if you're ever going to shoot that far. If you are shooting a red dot or if you are shooting a low power variable optic, I really like the 50 yard Zero. I use it on pretty much all my rifles, hunting rifles, bolt actions, red dots, LPVOs. I run a 50 yard Zero. I like it for a lot of reasons. Suggest that unless you know otherwise. If you want to run another Zero, as long as you have a good reason for it, I'm not going to tell you everybody has to do what I do. As long as you have a good reason for it, but I would recommend on an optic a 50 yard Zero. Say 5250, meaning that it'll be zeroed at 50 and it'll be a couple inches high. It'll be zeroed again at 250. That's not always the case. It may be 225, it may be 275, depending on a lot of different factors, but it'll be somewhere in that ballpark generally. Gives you a good point of aim, point of impact, meaning you aim center mass and you hit what you're shooting at point blank range from generally, muzzle distance to 250 yards or 300 yards even, which is great. I like the 50 yard Zero, so unless you have a better reason, I would suggest that. And obviously we're talking about the 223 and the Ar-15 platform, or the 5.56, and that is the most common. And that's what we're talking about. I could do a whole nother show on different calibers. If you want to run a different caliber and you have a good reason for it, I think that's great. There are definitely calibers that do certain things better. Talking about general purpose, like we're talking about general purpose fighting carbine, 223 is hard to beat. Are there better calibers out there for certain things? Yes, but they're also more expensive and harder to get and less options and ammo choices. So I would say, like I said, unless you know exactly what you want to do, hunt deer with a 6.5 Grendel, which is a great round, stick with the 5.56. With that, guys, I really appreciate you listening to the end of this podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. Leave a review of the podcast if you can. And again, if you'd like to support this community you're now a part of, go to Patreon, put a link in the show notes. And I don't often mention it, but if you like more visual stuff, I try and post on Instagram. If you want to check out visual to go along with the audio, you can go to Good Shepherd Training on Instagram. Good Shepherd Training is the podcast is the platform that hosts this podcast, and as an umbrella, goodshepherdtraining.com, Good Shepherd Training on Instagram, and Good Shepherd Training on Patreon. If you like this podcast, you may also like Alpha Male Podcast. It is what it sounds like it's about, and Simple Man Sermons if you care about the important stuff, the preachings of a simple man called by God to share the good news of Jesus Christ. Anyway, you can check those out, and if you want to support, again, Patreon link in the show notes. As a thank you for listening to the end, I will give a tactical tip. So whether it's the standard grip that comes on 15 or a different grip, a lot of times they come with you can get a plug that goes in the bottom of that grip. And I would suggest getting that, putting a couple of parts in there. I would suggest putting one spare round in there, at least more if you can fit it. One spare round in case you lose all your other ammunition. I would suggest putting a printout or a handwritten note, like some write in the rain paper or laminated card or something. That gun's dope. Dope meaning zero. The distance it's zeroed for, the ammunition is zeroed for, and keeping that in there in case for some reason you put it down for a long time and you pick it up or you give it to somebody else and they have to know how it shoots. You want them to have that information. If you want to, do the thing where you tape it to the stock, that's fine, but a good place for it is up in that grip module there with that cap on it. Things you can put in there are commonly broken or lost parts. That little pin that goes in the bolt, I don't know why they designed it like that, but they did, so you may want to put an extra pin in there. Another, tangential tactical tip is if you lose that pin, you can make another one out of a paper clip. I've done it, but you can put a spare in there or put a spare paper clip in there. Also, extractors. That is a commonly broken or worn out part. If extractors aren't that expensive, after you shot your rifle a couple of thousand rounds, that extractor still works. Maybe preventive maintenance, take that extractor that still works, put that in the grip, or just buy a whole spare one. Put it in there. That is a part that wears out and breaks. And whatever else you want to put in there, a spare set of earplugs, the list could go on. Any number of small things, a small ferrocerium rod to start a fire can go in there. All manner of things you can put in there. A small razor blade scalpel is a thing I often put in grips. So if something happens and I lose a bunch of other stuff, but I have my rifle, at least I have a way to cut something up. Alright guys, with that I'll wrap up this episode and say thanks, and have a blessed day.